Hello and welcome to
the Surprise Nurses Podcast.
Hello and welcome to How to Win the Lottery U module. It's not called Surprise Nurses.
Yeah, student nurses.
Student nurses.
I was thinking about my surprise that I was going to pretend like this was now a Student Nurses Podcast.
The Student Nurses Minute.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if we did this movie? But so we were eating dinner. We had the Criterion 24/7 channel on, and this movie came on. It's like an exploitation film, I guess, from the 70s, and it opens with trigger warning, whatever, an attempted rape in a hospital. Like, can you imagine if we were doing this minute by minute? Like, we would spend 2 minutes on that scene.
But also prior to the rape scene, it like has this like kind of vibe of like an old VHS movie. That's what it is. It's I guess 70s.
1970.
Oh wow, that early?
Yeah,
I wouldn't. Okay, so and it's like grainy film, and there's just like these like sort of beautiful women in the street.
They all live together and they all go in their car together.
And then the title comes out and it goes Student Nurses, and I was like, hell yeah,
we're watching this whole thing.
and then it goes like to 2 seconds in, it's just like there's this creepy guy staring a nurse down, and then he immediately just tries to rape her, and we're just like, oh well, there goes that.
Yep.
Thought we were gonna have some fun. Turns out,
student nurses.
Yeah.
You take some, you win some, you lose some. They take and they give. They give and they take.
Yeah.
I can see the TV from here. I'll let you know if it more creepy stuff. Well, guy just rubbing a woman's stomach. Anyway, We're here to talk about Suicide by Edward Levé. Mm-hmm. Short story, not as short as the next thing we're covering, but
kind of a snuff film.
So, did you know? I asked you.
I knew nothing
before we read this.
Yeah.
What this is about, and you said, "I think it's a suicide note."
Yeah.
And the text is basically, it feels almost like a speech at a funeral, but it's not.
Right.
Because it addresses speeches at funerals or whatever. But then you finish the text, which is like talking to you, who has just killed themselves in the opening page of the book. Afterward, from the translator, Edward Levé turned this in. A week later, killed himself. I'm just like, holy shit. Like, yeah. I wish that I knew that before reading.
I kind of wish that I didn't know that now, even.
Because it feels like it informs everything in like it completely upends what I think of the book.
It's manipulative in a way that like... I mean this seriously. It is very similar to a snuff film. Like you are you're reading something that is wearing the camouflage of fiction and literature. It is actually, I think, just a last effort to justify.
That he had decided he was going to kill himself, and he's trying to explain what he's doing.
Or explanation, which I think also is fine. And I bear no ill will to people who commit suicide. I know some people go crazy and say, it's cowardly or it's selfish or all of these things. I don't think that. I have a lot of empathy for people who die by suicide. I have... it's a choice, and it's something that you is very difficult, but it's also weird to not thrust it upon other people. But like
in this case, the reader.
Yeah. It feels like this is a suicide note in a very real way, but it's a suicide note that is meant for friends and family. Or the person in your life that needs to read your suicide note, and to do that and then and submit it and then kill yourself, it doesn't strike me as similar to something like The Bell Jar or Infinite Jest or any other work of art, or like the oeuvre of Kurt Cobain or the Frightened Rabbit or any other of these great artists that died by suicide, because what their art that is left behind is, it feels like art created inside of a world of someone who is struggling against something like depression,
right,
and trying to like cope with that and make sense of it through art. And then ultimately what happens is they lose that struggle. What this seems like is a guy making something and going like almost like the suicide is the art. It feels in a lot of ways it feels like a pro-suicide book to me.
Well, do you think then that the way that it's described in the afterword, he finishes the manuscript, turns it in, 7 days later kills himself.
Yeah.
Do you think the editor / publisher did something wrong in publishing this?
I don't know. I mean, no. It's not like I don't want to like
because like to your point, like if this is a pro-suicide thing,
right?
By publishing, are they condoning that?
Which is I actually like I don't even care. It's like fine to be pro-suicide. Like that doesn't that doesn't bother me. And anyone has the right to publish anything. I'm not like a person clutching my pearls. I'm not offended by this book, but I do feel manipulated by the book, which is an interesting, strange thing. And I'm not 100% sure how to articulate it. It's funny because he writes over and over again in the novel about this idea that like the fatalistic thing about suicide is that like it is the last thing that you do, but then it gets like rewritten into your life as like the reason for everything in your life.
Yep.
It becomes the final word on every gesture that you made with your hand or everything that you've done. And so this is like feels very much like a self-conscious response to that phenomenon, that he's addressing everything that happened his entire life with the idea that it's going to be viewed through the filter of his suicide. Mm-hmm. It's a hard concept to deal with. I don't know. Does anything that I said resonate, or do you disagree? How do you feel about all of this?
I think like I'm still trying to figure out how to think about this, like whether going back to the original thing we said, like I when I first finished it and read the afterword, my first thought was, I wish I knew the context for this before reading. But then in doing so, if I knew the context for reading, because I don't think this is a thing that I would reread, if I knew the context for what he was doing, then it almost becomes like a mystery you're trying to solve. Right. Like, which is, again, sort of reflected in the text. Like the person who was talking to you in the text, the person who died by suicide, they're trying to figure out why you did what you did. Yeah. And so then it becomes like this meta thing, but I don't think it necessarily becomes meta in like an interesting way. It becomes meta in a detective way that will never have answers and will never be satisfying.
And that's a self-conscious thing that he has done.
Right.
Right. So he has written about the phenomenon of you being incapable of separating the art from the person who took their own life by creating art that is inseparable from the real life suicide.
Because like now that we know, like when you think of Edward Levé, which I'm sure people who like knew about this, when you think of him, it's like the guy who wrote a suicide note and killed him. Like it's like that's like it becomes a defining thing of your life, right?
Yeah. And he's right about that. I mean, how much do people like, if you think of Nirvana, how much are you like, oh, what about that lyric, but I swear that I don't have a gun? Or that song, I Hate Myself and I Want to Die, which is like the song I Hate Myself and I Want to Die is like a satire about writing sad songs. And then like when you later on he kills himself, you go, well, was that really a satire? Or does all satire have a ring of truth to it? Or is it funny because it's true? And if that's funny because it's true, then like how dare we laugh at that?
Right. I don't know.
Yeah. There is funny stuff in this book, though. I kind of loved the whole thing about the grave that has, it says that he's 85 when
he's like 20, because he dies at 25.
Yeah.
And then like 21, he's just like, I'm gonna like mark like these are all the different things in my life, including dying at 85.
Yeah, and he says, like even if he dies, it's still going to say that he died at 85
Mm-hmm.
and he's going to be buried. And then people will look at it and be like, well, and then one day people will stop looking at it and being puzzled because he will have been.
He won't have died in 60 years from now or whatever.
Yeah. But he would have been older than 85. So people can stop looking at it and going like, that's peculiar. So it's like this long-term joke. And I think that's pretty funny. It's also hard to reflect on what happens inside the book because it is kind of just a description of justifications.
Well, we never also get like an explanation or understanding of who is narrating this.
Yeah, it's you get the sense that it's his friend, right? That the I character is a friend.
Well, so that was what I noted was, unlike the other things we've read so far, this module, there's a more heavy use of the word of I, of first person, which also makes, because like if there's a second person, it implies that there is a first person, but we haven't seen that yet.
Especially if the second person's story is over.
Right.
Right. So you need that first person narrator or third person narrator to come in and tell that story.
The other thing like that I was trying to figure out if we lose something is because this is also in translation with the Calvino book.
Right.
Are we losing something like that? Which I'm sure we are, but also like it didn't feel as apparent as in that one. He's literally saying like, we're using the to, like we're using the casual. Like this just feels like it could be, we probably are, but it doesn't feel as overtly like you really should be reading this in the original French.
Right. My assumption is that he's using the informal. I guess it would change if everything were VU.
Because like it feels like it's somebody who's close, but not too close. Like they don't have the answers, but they know enough to tell the story.
Yeah.
But there's also like it also shows the people like his suicide note was apparently the comic book that was left open to a certain page, and there's something that's like really sad about like the character's father becoming obsessed with that comic book and trying to find meanings and having like a suicide theories or whatever file of trying to figure out what that means. But so there are like glimpses at answers, but nothing even remotely concrete.
I mean, we have that too. When we think of famous people who've died that way, like famously Ian Curtis, like watched Strotzek and was listening to the Stooges. I think the Stooges may have just been Iggy Pop, but was listening to Iggy Pop when he died.
Who's Ian Curtis?
The singer for Joy Division.
Okay.
And so like now Strotzek has become this totem of a certain kind of grief because like Ian Curtis has redefined that already very sad movie, but into like last thing Ian Curtis did was watch this sad movie and then died. Right. So that's a kind of like leaving a comic book open to a certain page and then as like a key to the map of your.
Not to make light of the situation, but what if?
Yeah, I thought you were about to tell me what was going on in student nurses.
There's a man and a woman fully naked, and they're making love on a big sandy beach or something.
Oh, they're making love, are they?
It's shot very like very.
Yeah, you wouldn't say that they're fucking.
They're not.
Okay.
It's very sensual.
All right.
But I was just thinking about like imagine like you're just like watching the Criterion channel and you kill yourself. And then Student Nurses comes on.
Right,
like,
yeah.
But it's like, no, I wasn't watching that. I was just watching what was before.
The man who couldn't handle Student Nurses.
It's like, well, actually, time of death predates Student Nurses.
Yeah.
It's like, thank you, Mr.
Like,
Porter.
holy shit, what was on before then? Tetsuo. Fuck.
Tetsuo was ruined. Yeah, this is very sensual. What's going on right now? There's also something like really bizarre that I don't know if there's actual meaning, but I'm sure there's meaning. I don't know what it is, but there are two different covers that I found.
The one that I have is the pointillist one that I think has been the way that all of Levé's books have been sort of reprinted.
Right.
For New Directions is new.
Like so that, right?
Yeah, I think it's New Directions.
So that's the art that I'm using for this.
Yeah.
There's this one, which to me is way weirder.
Oh yeah, that's very strange.
It's three people, I think like three people, like sort of doing, for lack of a better descriptor, a human centipede of grief.
Can you Can we check in with the Honorable Judge Matt Erdely on this? Can you just text message him to see if he's available?
It feels like bedtime, but
Or yeah, this is definitely putting the kids to bedtime, so probably not.
Is there any chance you're free for a segment on the pod? We desperately need the Honorable Judge Matt Erdely for one of these.
Cue the Camper Van Beethoven, baby.
Because I was like, the way that I do the episode art, which we put on Instagram and also on the Cage website, is I just like find the cover and either like I take an item from the cover or I use like a big thing, and I'm just like, well, let me just like look up Edward Levé suicide, and I'm like, okay, so here's the one. I'm like, what the fuck is that? And it doesn't seem like it's just like one. And
well,
like,
it's so similar to this thing that I saw at an exhibit in Montreal, which I have on my phone. Yeah, look at this. It's kind of like that, right?
it is like that.
Yeah, where all these people's like are just jamming their heads into each other's pants.
Yeah, me looking at very serious art.
Yeah.
The pointillism one makes sense to me. It's like, it's an incomplete story. It's a man, but you're trying to put together the pieces.
Yeah.
I don't know what this is about.
Yeah, it looks like just I don't know. It has the aesthetics of a pamphlet in a doctor's office.
Yeah.
Which is maybe you think that's like what it's going for?
I mean, this is like hosted on Amazon. I mean, I don't know if it's like listed on Amazon or what, but like I don't know. I do not know.
Yeah.
The thing I was like, my big takeaway, my big confusion before I got to the afterward, and I was like, oh, the entire way that I read this book needs to be reevaluated because of what happened in real life. The final like 20 pages are just poetry.
Yeah, which is also very strange poetry.
It's like, and it's all like something me, something me, something me, something me, something me, something me. It's like the night does this, the day does this, the blah, blah, like it's just.
Yeah, it's non-rhyming triplets.
And I'm just like, this is weird. And then like before you even had time to process that, it's just like, Edward Levé turned this in and 7 days later killed him. I'm just like, okay, poetry doesn't matter anymore. Like, this is what I'm caring about now. But like, I don't know what it's so much poetry.
Yeah, because it's a 128 page book, something like that, right?
The Kindle version's 90.
Okay. And then probably the last like 25 pages are poetry.
Yeah. I'm sure that many people have written papers about explicitly the poetry in this, but it feels like he's working through something.
Yeah, for sure.
What that is, I don't know.
Yeah, I have a hard time with poetry, and it feels abstract in a way that's hard for me to grasp. Do you have any of the poetry available?
I can bring it up.
Yeah. So
it starts with, ferns caress me, nettles sting me, brambles scratch me.
Yeah, so it's creating, you have subject, verb, object, and then it's usually like three of a type. Mm-hmm. Three different feelings that thing gives.
3 nouns, 3 verbs, me.
And then me, yeah.
Day dazzles me, evening soothes me, night envelops me.
Yeah.
Tobacco irritates me, alcohol tranquilizes me, drugs isolate me. Friendship ties me, love reveals me, sex delights me. The basement repels me, the attic appeals to me, the staircase guides me. Offenses surprise me, retorts come slowly from me, contempt avenges me. And I do wonder if this in French
has a greater meter, and
because it does feel like the translator's like, I get what he's trying to do, and how can I convey this to English?
Yeah, I think poetry is.
I mean, I just keep going back to like Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, where they're just like, how much do we change the meaning by changing the translation?
Or, I mean, the thing that everyone was mad about on Twitter recently was Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey.
Oh, right.
People are so pissed off about that. And it's like, it's so funny because they're mad. I think largely they're mad because because she's a woman and she's the first woman to translate the Odyssey and kind of has a feminist take on it. And so people are really mad and they're just like, that translation's not even good compared to this translation. But those people don't read Greek. And so what they mean by that's not a good translation is this one sounds fancier and more like what I think the Odyssey should sound like, because that's the thing, that translation is the thing that they've been using in their brains as what the Odyssey should sound like.
Right.
So when hers doesn't sound like what they think the Odyssey should sound like, it sounds like something different, they think that's a bad translation. But they have no idea because they don't fucking read Greek. And they're just angry because they're angry. And they think that they're like literature scholars, but they're not.
The only thing I can really compare this to, there's two naked women on screen right now. When I grew up going to church, and there'd be like the traditional, King James Bible or whatever, which I'm like, I don't know how to parse this. Like, I'm 8 or whatever.
Right.
And then there's like basically Bible for kids, where they completely rewrite everything, but it's just like, oh, I actually understand what's going on here. And I'm not saying that like that's the same thing as like a feminist take on a thing, but it's like, if you can put a new spin on a thing or like help people understand it better or relate to it more, like, I don't think it's a bad thing. I can see why purists might get upset, but it also feels like there's more at stake here.
Yeah, hers says something like...
Not at stake, but like
her first lines say something along the lines of, let me tell you the story of a complicated man. And then there's something like, Cannibal King, you eat your people up. And people don't like that because the other versions, the Robert Fitzgerald version or whatever, is much more in line with King James style prose, which is what we've been sort of taught is this is how the fancy books are.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, that's not how.
What if Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey uses her translation? Then all these same bros who probably love Christopher Nolan will have a reckoning.
I wonder how much a film adaptation would be a direct translation of it anyway. Like, how much of the dialogue are they going to keep? Because the dialogue is not really what's important. Because what's important is it says, it's always like whenever Athena is introduced, like gray-eyed Athena, and then whenever Dawn is introduced, it says rosy-fingered Dawn, and things like that. So it's like the prose is the thing that needs translation, and then on film, you're not going to see the prose. It would be weird if Nolan's Odyssey did not have shots of pink sunrises and stuff like that, because that's such a essential part of the...
Is that in her translation too?
Yeah, I think so. I read that a while ago. But also, like, I don't know from translations. I don't read ancient Greek. You
didn't learn Greek when you married two people in Greece? You didn't learn the language?
I like that made me sound like a bigamist.
You perform the sacred duty of marriage upon two people.
Yeah. Because I'm a sea captain and I can do that.
Mm-hmm. In the Sea Org.
Yeah, in the Sea Org, which I have to get back to actually in a minute. Because
you signed that contract.
Yeah, I'm there for the next 32,000 years. But I don't know anything about translation. So when I read it, though, when I read Emily Wilson's translation, what I thought mostly was, this is pleasing. This really moves. She seems to be hitting all the story beats that I'm familiar with from the other ones. Nothing really has changed. What was interesting to me about her translation was more the 70-page foreword that exists before the translation, which is really interesting and goes into why she made a lot of the choices that she made. I would love to know more about I would love to know more about translators and translations and the work that they do.
It feels so daunting.
It really does. And there are some people I know that, I forget her name. I think it's Charlotte something, does the translations for Matthias Enard and his books like Compass or, I forget the names of his books, but they seem so difficult because the language is so complicated and grammatically complicated in the translation that it's like, I can't imagine what that's like trying to craft this thing that is sentences that are 30 pages and because the grammatical structure of a 30-page sentence is so strange that then to have to take that from one language and put it into another language it just seems like a task not meant for humans. It seems so difficult to me.
And like the pool of translators is so self-selectingly small. It's like must know two specific languages, the language that you are reading and then the language you are translating into. Also must be a good writer and not only notice but understand the language. Yeah. And then also have creative thing to be like, well, what do they actually intend
I had a teacher that did translations from Italian to English. And she did six characters in search of a whatever, that one, and some other stuff. But I think she made most of her translating money doing subtitles for television.
Sure.
Which I think is where, like, if you're a translator, I think that's where the money is.
Probably.
Because you're not going to, like, there's not that much market for some novel, which is the hard work, versus, like, a soap opera where you're just, Edward, no.
Right.
And it's like subtitles that say pensive music and then
Grand Theft Hamlet.
C. I don't know. I feel like Matt's not going to get back to us.
No, he said it probably in an hour, so that's not going to,
All right. Were we vamping just then, or were we having a podcast conversation?
We're having a podcast conversation.
Okay.
I'm keeping us on track.
All right.
I also found the actual narrative, and I know this is kind of the point. It was difficult for me to remain invested in or follow because it so often bounces around. Because it does feel like a character trying to make sense of an act that is both easy to understand and impossible to understand.
Yeah.
And so he's just like, well, then there's this you did, and there's also this you did, and like whatever, and just it was tough for me to like remain like, well, what's going on? Because like there's also no chapters, like it's just a 90-page or 70-page or 120-page or whatever, just straight shot of trying to make sense of a thing.
Yeah, it made me think a lot about the idea that suicide, not even suicide, your death. If you're not a believer, your death is much more something that happens to other people than it happens to you.
Well, there's the thing in here, just like when I think suicide, I think you. I don't think my grandma when I think cancer, because I've lost lots of people to cancer. But like when I think like you have owned suicide for me or whatever the exact. It's just like that's like like there's certain things that just like no, this is now tied to that person.
Right. And also when someone dies violently, when someone chooses to take their own life, they become less than a human in that their story then becomes something that gets told in a way that is diminishing of their humanity. If you know someone who died by suicide, that person might be incredibly meaningful to you. People around you will know that you had a friend that died by suicide, and then they will talk to you about that. And you'll say, yeah, this character shoots himself with a shotgun. He shot himself with a shotgun and blah, blah. And then the people that you tell, a handful of them will then go, oh, my friend, like he has a friend that just killed himself with a shotgun. And then it becomes something it becomes petty lifetime drama. And that person's pain becomes like a thing where people just go like, how sad. Like he had so much to live for. And it's like, motherfucker, you don't know like what my story is. And it's so much more complicated than just the thing that happened.
Because I was wondering, and I think this is also something that the text is trying to make sense of, is like the book seems like this is pretty depressing shit, right? But it's like it's trying to figure out, I think, what is depressing about it. Because I was like, is it just because somebody died? Yeah. Is it because they were so young? Is it because there were seemingly no signs pointing toward it? Is it something because we already attribute depression and sadness with suicide, and when another thing happens, it's just like, and it feels like the narrator in this is trying to make sense of like, what is the most profound sadness of this possibly? Or maybe I'm just trying to like think about it myself, but I'm like, it feels like it's so sad he was 25, but it's like, if you're tortured for 25 years, like that's no way to live. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it also feels, and this is a pivot from a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about. It feels like kind of capital L literature.
In a good way or a bad way?
I don't know. I don't know that we need to make a good bad distinction between that sort of thing, but it is, I think in America, we think like foreign literature from a prestige press, about suicide, written in the second person, in some ways feels aloof. Like, for everything that you've said about it being like sad, I don't know that I felt the sadness in the story so much as it felt like it was almost, to me, aloof about the idea of death.
Well, I think it's also like what I was trying to say, like it's hard because it keeps bouncing around, right? Like he doesn't dwell on a particular like train of thought.
I do. One thing that I love, and this is again a side, not chronological to what we're saying, which is why it makes sense to talk about this now, is that he says when he thinks of other people's lives, he doesn't think of them chronologically. He just thinks of the snapshots of individual moments.
Sure.
So when you assemble a friend of yours life, it runs much more like a trailer to a movie than it does to any sort of like cradle to grave Charles Dickens style story, which is true. When I think of friends that I've had or friends that I've lost, I don't think of
when you met them through the end.
Yeah. You just think of like, on this night, we like threw ice cream cones off the bridge at those people's heads or whatever. And, you know, memory works in a very scattershot kind of way. So that's how Edward Levé writes novels. The other book that I'm familiar with of his is Autoportrait, which I haven't read, but I've read the Jesse Ball kind of cover version of that,
which was recommended by
Adam Levine.
Right.
And it's really good. And so I think Jesse Ball took what was essentially the style of it. And that is just, like a sentence by sentence recounting of a life, but it's a sentence by sentence recounting of a life, not in a cradle to grave kind of way, but in a way where it'll go from saying, you know, when I was a child, my mother did these things that really damaged me because of this reason, that reason, and that reason. Also, I like to paint Warhammer figures, and it'll spend like a page or two talking about, you know, the different interests, and then a memory from when he's 40, and then cut back, and then it's just like facts about life, things that he thinks about. Which I think, I don't know if I wouldn't call it the start to it, but it's the definitely like a seminal text within auto fiction as a genre, which has since become incredibly popular, almost a dominant form of literary fiction in the past 20 years.
Well, there's also I think it's in the afterword here is Aleppo. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
We talked about on the last episode, right? But like that is also once again
George Perec. They talk about George Perec, a Life of User's Manual, and the other book, which is Suicide, a Death Manual or something like that.
Was a Man Asleep or something? There's two. I don't know. We're getting to a Perec one later.
We have a Perec one later on. Yeah.
But it is like, oh, okay, that's the thing you were talking about. We're going to get to the guy and whatever.
Yes.
Was there one other thing I wanted to say? Maybe there wasn't.
How do you feel about this book overall? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
Thumbs sideways. I think it's fine.
I felt, I don't know.
I
felt a little blindsided by it.
I feel, and we're going to really get this in the next episode, which we do the Marguerite Duras 20-page-ish short story. I feel like I'm more critical of short stuff because I'm like, you really got to land it.
Yeah.
Because in a longer thing, even if they don't land it, there's going to be more opportunity for stuff that I like. And there's like moments in here that are like passages that I like, but overall I'm just like, I don't really. And then again, to the blindside thing, just like it completely, it felt like he was processing his own grief about someone else. And it's like, well, it's actually about him. It's just like, well, that is not at all what I thought.
Yeah.
So. Read Egg's email?
See what the Eggster has to say about it.
All right. So we have an email address, lottery@cageclub.me. If you want to write in about this book, any book, also what you want to see in the bookstore.
Yeah. Right about that.
Meg's reaction to suicide.
I know she was bummed out by it. I had that conversation with her where she was
it's not an uplifting book.
Yeah, she felt a little down about it.
The first line is literally, this book was a bit of a bummer.
Yeah.
It was small, the sentences themselves were simple, but I would not call it a, quote, fast read.
I agree with that.
The structure of the sentences added a heaviness to it. The book itself was more of a meditation on the concept of a life, of a friend, instead of a novel. Because of the way the author died, even that read is nebulous. I found myself wondering how I would have responded to this book if I didn't know about the author's suicide. On one hand, it has a deeper insight into Levé's mental state, but also on the other hand, it feels almost like marketing voyeurism. The back of the book that I read says, quote, "Suicide is not then simply another novel. It is, in a sense, the author's own oblique public suicide note, a unique meditation on this most extreme of refusals."
Yeah, I dislike that very much about this book.
I feel like the book stands on its own, Egg writes, without needing the, quote, true ghost story flavor the marketing is pushing at us.
Yes, very much so. I think that is a point well made and better articulated than I made it.
That's kind of what I was, like when I was asking before. I'm like, is it like irresponsible to publish this? Well, like maybe not to publish it, but like to publish it in this way, maybe.
I don't know. Irresponsible. It's annoying.
Yeah.
And it's manipulative in a way that I would not say don't do anything. I would just roll my eyes at it and be like, that kind of makes me feel sad.
Right. I kept mentally comparing this with David Foster Wallace's description of suicide from Infinite Jest. Quote, "The person in whom its invisible agony reaches a certain unendurable level will kill herself the same way a trapped person will eventually jump from the window of a burning high-rise. Make no mistake about people who leap from burning windows. Their terror of falling from a great height is still just as great as it would be for you or me, standing speculatively at the same window just checking out the view, i.e. the fear of falling remains a constant. The variable here is the other terror, the fire's flames, when the flames get close enough, falling to death becomes the slightly less terrible of two terrors." End quote.
Yeah. Jeez.
The description of suicide in both texts is so different. In Suicide, the act itself isn't really spoken of in a negative way. For example, quote, "In art, to reduce is to perfect. Your disappearance bestowed a negative beauty on you." And she says, "I know that it literally says negative in that quote, but I took it to mean a photo negative or inversion, not the opposite of positive."
That is the correct reading of that sentence.
In Infinite Jest, there was a level of fear to it. I wonder if the main difference could be said that Levé had already made up his mind to kill himself by the time the book was written, and David Foster Wallace was still resisting the urge while writing Jest.
That is exactly what it is. Is that Wallace is trying to figure out a path out of deep depression, while also being understanding of it and being able to empathize with people who are trapped by the flames because he himself felt trapped by the flames. But that book is I think in some ways an attempt to write his way out of depression, or at least look for a way to apply some CPR to the idea of life as something that's worth living.
Sure.
And this guy is writing a book, it seems, with full knowledge of the future.
Like he's accepted what he's going to do.
Yeah, Wallace lasted a long time. For someone that struggled with the things that he struggled with, it seems like he lasted a long time after Infinite Jest. And I'm sure that he had ups and downs. And I know he was medicated and then went off his medication, and that is part of it. But yeah, his writing is the writing of someone trying to survive. And this writing is the writing of someone who is ready to die.
Yeah. All in all, Egg writes, I think I liked Suicide, but it was definitely depressing.
Yeah.
Keep reading. Is today's crime throwing ice creams at people's heads over the bridge?
No. No, that's not a crime. I don't think that's a crime. I don't think you can be arrested for that. Today's crime is burning down your business for the insurance money.